Or questions before the microphone if you want.
How can we trust Israel? Because they've already infiltrated our country.
They've already what? Infiltrated?
Our,
Hi. Could you say something about, okay, I assume that initially there was a good part of Israeli settlers who wanted simply a homeland, and some of it was, they didn't want to expand, they didn't necessarily, even many of them need to expel Palestinians.
Right.
There were people who wanted to have one state with the Palestinians. When did the vision for Israel change? When did I mean, like America wants to be number one.
That's right.
What does Israel want? Obviously, they want to be number two. What do they want?
You know, there's a joke. Why, you know, it could be part of number one, the 51st state. There's a joke, why doesn't Israel want to be the 51st state? Because then it would only have 2 senators. So it changed. I think it changed. No, I think it changed. I mean, all these years, I mean, Israel has always wanted the entire country. There was never, ever, ever, never in the last 100 years of Zionism any serious thought of that there is a Palestinian people, that they have rights, that we're going to live together with them, that we're going to share the land. That was never part of the equation. So Israel kind of did what it could do, you know, in 48, because of the circumstances, it accepted the UN plan, but then in the war, it took half the Palestinian, you know, and then in 67, it took, in other words, it had the opportunities in the drawer, and when the opportunity arose, it went the next stage, and then the next stage, and the next stage. And I think what happened was, basically it's taken the entire country. Today, there really is one state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, one army, one government, one currency, one water system. And now the problem is, what do we do with half the population that's Palestinian? We have their land, they're living under our permanent control, but we can't give them citizenship, because then it wouldn't be a Jewish state. So this is where Israel has to work very hard. I mean, I don't want to say that the occupation is popular in the world. I mean, in American, at least on paper, in foreign policy, the United States is against the occupation. Every country is against the occupation. So it isn't that they accept it, but so Israel has to work very hard to get an unpopular policy of occupation that's more and more repressive towards Palestinians. In an apartheid situation, you know, after the end of apartheid in South Africa, to get the international community to support an apartheid state. And that's where I think it goes more and more and more in this direction. Because it says, again, the quid pro quo. What do we have to do to get, you know, governments and the elites to support us? And, you know, if we can deliver for them, if we can help them stay in control, then they'll de facto. It might not do it out, you know, they might not say we accept it, but, you know, in their policies, of course, they'll accept it. So I think it's that kind of a thing.
Jack, thanks for being here. Good to see you again. For the last couple of years, there's been a conference in Oakland called Urban Shield, and it's a conference that sells a lot of these materials.
That's right.
And
Urban Shield is an Israeli-based.
I was going to ask you how much of it is Israeli-based and how much of it is other military, industrial corporations that are trying to encourage police departments like Oakland. Many of them have done a lot of this training and have used that training, especially on Occupy Oakland.
That's right.
And some of the other protests that came out with Black Lives Matter a couple of Novembers ago.
That's right. And no, Urban Shield is a program of militarizing the police. that has very strong ties to Israel. Israel, you know, there's a program that's run by Jewish organizations. It's called, is an organization called JINSA, which is a Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs. It's kind of it's like it's a Jewish pro-Israel group in Washington, you know, that presents itself as a think tank on security things. And they run a program called LEAP, L-E-E-P, which is Law Enforcement Exchange Program, where they send American police people, police chiefs. Twice a year they have a conference for chiefs of major American police forces in Israel. But then, you know, the heads of certain departments, the head of the counterterrorism department, they do training in Israel with American police, and then the Israeli police come here as well and do training, and Urban Shield is a part of that. So one thing, I have a whole chapter in my book about it. You know, one thing I asked was, I mean, what does Israel have to teach LAPD? I mean, this is one of the most brutal police forces in the world. They invented SWAT teams. I mean, they have to learn from Israel? What can Israel teach them? Well, it turns out that that Israel teaches, it doesn't so much teach, but one of the things that happens is that Israel legitimizes what you want to do. You're a macho cop, you know, or you're, and you want to be tough on counterterrorism, and you want SWAT teams, you want military equipment in your city. You know, you want to militarize and you want to get tough and all that sort of stuff, which goes a little bit against the grain of civil liberties and da-da-da. So if you can come as a chief of police to the legislature in Sacramento, or come to the mayor or whatever, and say, I was trained in Israel, or the Israelis were here in my department, and they recommended that we restructure the counterterrorism department, and we bring in these kinds of weapons, and we do this, and we do that. That gives the kind of the authority, the legitimacy for doing what you'd want to do anyway, but you can do it under the cover that this is what Israel, and of course, if Israel, I mean, there's no expert on security like Israel. So that you've got this, and of course Israel then introduces this idea that that citizens are merely potential terrorists, and you know, you're very light on the trigger in the Israeli system. So it has a tremendous impact, I think, and you should look into it. I think that should be a part of the BDS campaign.
First of all, Jeff, I want to thank you for your brave witness and your activism throughout all these years. I know living in Israel, it's not easy. And again, I applaud you and I appreciate you. Two questions. Number one, could you explain how Israel incentivizes economically settler movement, you know, beyond the ideologically driven, you know,
Right.
economically driven? And secondly, if you can tell us what you're going to be doing now that apparently you're stepping away from the International Committee Against House Demolition. What's the next step for you?
What Israel's done is normalize the occupation, so that you're not living, it's not occupation anymore. You know, you're living in Judea and Samaria, and Israelis don't perceive any difference anymore from the Palestinian areas, and so if the government subsidizes housing, 85% of the new housing is started in the occupied territory. And you get tax breaks if you move into what's called the Development Area A. And, you know, and you have really, if you're a working class person, you really have a chance to better your standard of living. You have a nice apartment and good infrastructure and parks and schools. So in a sense, it incentivizes it by making a middle class standard of living available to working class Israelis. So in a way, they're pitting working class Israelis against Palestinians. You know, because You know, what happens if I have to get out of my settlement? Why I have to go back to a housing project? So the most strongest defenders of settlements become people that aren't really against Arabs, but their interests are pitted against Arabs. So one of the things I'm doing, just to say it really quickly, I'm sort of moving to an organization I call the People Yes Network, which is partly part of the global thing. You're never going to organize the left, you know that. We're a herd of cats. We can't. I mean, even in this room, I'm surprised we got so many people together. So the idea is to try to provide a certain infrastructure, kind of a network, where groups on the left all over the world can begin to coordinate better than we have been, and to introduce these global things that I've been talking about. You know, there was a very destructive, I think, bumper sticker in the 60s. Remember, think globally, act locally. Well, the corporations love that, because then they're the only ones that act globally. So we're all reduced to doing little tiny things in our local communities, and we lost the global. And so I'm trying to kind of restore that. And one of the things that I'm starting with is this idea of the military and security so I'm trying to develop a kind of what I call a portal, sort of an online museum. They will take what I've been talking about today and so on, and present it in a kind of like an exhibit, like you'd go through an exhibit online. But then you can go through these to deeper sorts of exhibits. The idea is to try to reveal or expose this military security system in a visual way, especially to young people. I mean, how many people are going to read my book? I mean, it's very nice of you to buy it. I'm not so sure if I came back in 6 months and asked, how many are really going to read it? I mean, it's a tome. And some of it is technical, military stuff. Young people aren't going to read it. You know, so we have to find ways of getting critical and complex analyses out in ways that young people and activists can access. And I love museums. Museums have a way of doing that. Museums can be very provocative and not threatening. So kids come to exhibits about things they would never let you come into the school to talk about. You know? And so I'm trying to sort of say to the left, maybe we should try to use this kind of a strategy of, like a museum, to present these ideas in ways that people can understand them, access them. And so that's sort of where I'm going with my life. Last, and then I'll let you, well, not necessarily.
Is Israel's involvement in local and state police departments readily acknowledged, or is it covered up and disguised?
No, it's readily acknowledged. I mean, the police are very, like I'm telling you, the police use that as a way of saying, hey, you know, look, we're being trained by Israel is seen as a good thing. And, you know, somebody asked me earlier today, how did I get all this information? You know, a lot of it must be secret. No. I mean, what's the point of developing a weapon system if it's secret? The whole idea is you want to market it. You want to sell it. You want to show how good you are. You want to, you know. So it's all out there. There are 250 Israeli companies that sell military stuff. There's another 250 companies that sell security, police-related equipment and everything. Each one of them has, you're talking about 500 websites. How many pages is a website? You know, websites have a bunch of pages. You've got thousands of pages and pictures on, on the internet of all these sorts of things. And, you know, and yes, I could pull it up now. I'm not going to, but I can pull it up now, saying, yes, we've worked with the San Francisco Police Department. We've worked with, you know, they brag about it because that's what gives them the credibility. They'll give you lists of all the police departments, some Israeli security company, a private company says, we've trained all these police forces in the United States. It's all there. Now isn't it hidden, but it's very much, you know, it's like tonight. I mean, you know who I am. You know the context. But if you didn't, somebody said to me, this could be a presentation of the Israeli Chamber of Commerce. Sounds great. If you think of it in that sense, wow, Israel's got these weapons, and it's training the police, and it's all over the world, and it's so efficient, and it's so, where do I buy? Where do I sign? I want in. I want to invest in this, you know, so we're looking at it obviously critically. But for most people, it's a good thing because it contributes to our security, and of course Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, and you know, the whole thing. That's where all the framing it comes in.
This entire system is in service of profit and fear, and I know that a lot of psychological investigation, experimentation has been done to develop and manage society's responses to fear, and I think a lot of it is being done in Israel, and certainly the poor
We
Palestinian.
can't hear you at all. I can't.
The poor Palestinian population has been part of that experimentation, as you're saying. Can you talk any more about the development of the field of psychology as a basis for making humanity afraid enough to invest our future in this?
Well, a lot of it has to do with this framing, which has to do with the subject of psychology. There's a guy, Fred Lutz, what is his name? L-U-T-Z, who's the main language strategist for the Republican Party. He's the guy that makes up things like family values. You know, it takes repressive, terrible programs and gives them nice names. On the internet, you can find it. He wrote a dictionary that pro-Israel advocates could use of the language they should use. You know, security language. And he says Americans love freedom, so use, you know, freedom. We're concerned about the freedom of the Palestinians, and the Palestinians are, of course, saddled by a leadership of terrorists, and we're really freeing them. I mean, you find ways to frame it so that it speaks, it resonates with Americans, but you can do it with any population. So it's very sophisticated. So I would, it's a whole field. I would really look at, if you want to know how Israel on campuses and in the media, sells itself so well, just look up this Fred Lutz in the internet, and you'll see it all laid out. So it's a very sophisticated. I mean, it's partly psychology, it's partly advertising, of course. Use of advertising. It's all these techniques that manipulate. I mean, advertising manipulates us all the time. So why not use it in the service of? The military uses advertising, which is what the Super Bowl was all about in a way.
For at least the last decade, the Israeli consulate has, throughout the world, have been talking about branding Israel.
Branding, that's right.
So,
Exactly. That's right.
and openly.
Brand Israel. It's a campaign, Brand Israel. And part of it is what's called pink washing. Tel Aviv has a reputation being an open city for gay and, lesbian and transgender, and so they use that. You see, show me another city in the Middle East that's tolerant, So you turn it all around that way.
So, where do you see,
This will be the last question.
what's your projection for the future of the occupation? Is it just more and more settlements and the Palestinians keep getting squeezed?
Right.
When I see what Israel does with their part, all this military stuff, it's like they're just being mean. And so, a people that was oppressed for centuries is oppressing another people. Is that just going to continue the way it is now?
Well, look, let's end on a positive note. And that is, for all the vaunted stuff I've been talking about, Israel hasn't pacified the Palestinians. It hasn't eliminated Palestinians. Even in Gaza, little Gaza, resistance continues. So it isn't that, Israel with all this equipment, all this kind of stuff can actually end Palestinian resistance. And at the same time, for all the Fred Lutzes and all the language and everything else, I think people are beginning to get it. I mean, churches are speaking out. The Presbyterian Church, the Methodists are starting the divesting. The Friends and the Church of the Brethren. I mean, there's a lot of churches, and the Jewish Voice for Peace is the largest growing American Jewish organization. So, people are, even within the Jewish community, it's very hard, but people are starting to get it. So it's not that, we have to say that people still think a little bit, and there's still, with the internet, there's still alternative information that comes in. We have to work to strengthen that, I think. We can't just rely on the fact that we have an Ilan Pape that writes books and Ali Abu Nima and good people like that. We have to be much more, I think, Palestinians and Israelis in this case, in particular, have to be much more proactive in terms of telling people where we should be going. So that's a good question. What's going to happen? Well, we should have an answer for that. And we don't. We haven't formulated a solution or an end game. And I think that's a weakness of ours. I would like to see, well, I think we already have one state. And it's an apartheid state, which is unacceptable. So I think first of all, we have to transform that one state that Israel created into a democratic state of all its citizens, which somehow shouldn't be such a hard sell in the United States. You guys are trying to push democracy all over the world. The Palestinians are saying, please, give us some democracy. And all of a sudden, no, you can't have it. So that's part of it. And then I would add to that a kind of a binational element. I mean, there are two national groups. It isn't like the United States. It's more like Canada, or the UK, Britain, or Spain, where you have one democratic country. Everybody has equal rights and equal vote in the parliament, but they acknowledge that there's, for example, in the UK, there's English and Scots and Northern Irish and the Welsh, each of which have their cultures, their institutions, their languages, even parliaments. So I think you could find a way to give a lot of self-determination to Palestinian Arabs and Israeli Jews that doesn't necessarily mean two states.